Okay, recording we are. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the next edition of the Grand Traverse Community Collaborative. If you aren't familiar with me, I am your friendly neighborhood coordinator, Sharon Breland, and I will go around my screen and ask everybody to quickly introduce themselves, name, and where they are from this morning. So Chip, we'll start with you.
Chip Selinsky, Director of Catholic Human Services.
And Daryl.
Daryl Nelson, Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners. New in my job, learning as I go.
Wonderful. And Jose.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Jose Rangel. I'm with the Networks Northwest with the Offender Success Program.
And Val Stone.
I'm Val, and I'm from the Northwest Food Coalition and also Food Rescue. Finally back at the warehouse after 1 year. I'm so happy.
Yay. Lauren.
Lauren Reed from the Grand Traverse County Drug Free Coalition.
Lisa Anderson.
Lisa Anderson, Up North Prevention, which is part of Catholic Human Services.
Kathleen.
Hi, I'm Kathleen English with Habitat for Humanity Grand Traverse Region.
Heather.
Good morning, Heather Patterson with the Women's Resource Center for the Grand Traverse area.
And Carrie.
Hi, Carrie Bachman with Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency.
Carl.
Good morning, Carl Kovacs. I'm the CEO of Northern Lakes Community Mental Health Authority.
And Kirsten, I'm sorry.
Good morning, I'm Kirsten Keilitz. I will be starting at Legal Services of Northern Michigan on April 6th, but I've been getting your emails for many years, so I thought I'd join in.
Hi. Gina.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Gina Oranke with Child and Family Services, Northwestern Michigan.
Jen.
Morning, Jen Weber from Grand Traverse County Probate and Family Court.
Mary.
Mary Kavanagh, Deputy Director, Legal Services of Northern Michigan, and yes, welcoming Kirsten Keilitz to our group as another Deputy Director starting early April.
Mai Stanley, I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager at Traverse Health Clinic.
Joe.
Morning, everyone. Joe Bagby, Resource Coordinator, Department of Health and Human Services.
And Caitlin.
Morning, everyone. I'm Katie Borchard. I am the Program Director at the Traverse Bay Children's Advocacy Center.
Margie.
Hi, I'm Margie Rich. I am the Director of Generations Ahead.
And Alan.
Alan Vanderpaal, Bay Area Transportation Authority.
Debbie.
Morning, Debbie Aldridge, Grand Traverse Regional Community Connections Hub and the Healthy Futures Universal Home Visiting Program.
Sarah.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Hughes. I'm the Homeless Preventions Manager at Northwestern Michigan Community Action Agency.
All righty. And other than our presenters, I think that's it for now. So thank you all again for joining us this morning. And today we're going to talk about domestic violence and how we address that in the area. So today we have with us Noelle Muggenberg, the Grand Traverse County Prosecuting Attorney, Christy Butcher, I'm probably murdering that, from the Women's Resource Center, the Director of Advocacy, and I haven't seen Autumn join yet, but Autumn Sutter from the Safe Haven Program, the Safe Haven Program Supervisor. So ladies, take it away.
Good morning. Christy, do you want to start with a little
Well, I guess, good morning, everyone. Noelle Muggenberg from the prosecutor's office. I feel like I know most of you, and I feel like our presentation may be a little basic given the level of expertise in this audience, but I've been at the prosecutor's office for about 22 years, and during that time I've focused in domestic violence and sexual assault cases. So good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good. And thanks for having us. And I wanted to talk a little bit, just a basic DV 101. And again, I know many of you, this may be a review, but just in case there's some new folks out there who aren't as familiar, I think it's good to have a working definition of what we're talking about when we're discussing domestic violence. So I think the most important thing to remember is when we say domestic violence or intimate partner violence, what we're talking about is a relationship where one partner has power and control over the other. And that power and control can take a variety of tactics. Obviously, physical abuse is the most common thing that people think of when you say domestic violence. And obviously, to physically abuse another person is illegal. And that's when Noelle's office would definitely be getting involved. But unfortunately, there's a lot of aspects of domestic violence that, even though they might be morally wrong, are not illegal, because we could also be talking about emotional abuse. We could be talking about financial abuse, which if the parties are married is probably not illegal if one partner controls all the access to the money. The form of sexual abuse, there's usually a lot of isolation tactics used by the abusive partner because they don't want their victim to be surrounded by people that will say, hey, you know what your husband or your wife is doing to you isn't okay. I'm here to help you if you want to leave, if you want to get out. And I think that's a big barrier for a lot of victims when they might be considering leaving. They don't think they have anyone to help them because of that isolation. There's a tool that we use, the power and control wheel, that kind of isolates a lot of these abusive tactics, such as the minimizing, denying, and blaming of the abuse. Abusers very rarely will hold themselves accountable and actually admit that what they did was abusive, what they did was wrong. They're going to minimize and deny it. The isolation use of children. A lot of victims fear that their children would be harmed if they left the relationship. And that may be financial harm, or what is going to happen to my children if I go into a shelter. Or it may be I'm going to lose custody because he's the one with the stable income and residence. Or it may be just the idea that children need two parents in the home. So there can be a lot of factors that become barriers for a victim leaving. So I guess I kind of want to open it up if anyone has any questions about kind of domestic violence in general, what we're talking about, what that might look like, because I don't want to ramble on for a 101 review for people who may already have that information.
And Autumn, maybe if you want to do a little introduction and what your program does.
Hi, everybody. I'm Autumn Slutter. I am the program supervisor of Safe Haven at Child and Family Services. I'm here to talk a little bit about what our program does for the community, how you can refer people, who we see, and also to put emphasis on the impact on the children that use our services. Our youngest clients that we have at Child and Family Services sometimes are the ones that are victimized the most. And so just to kind of give some perspective of like how kids are put in the middle of these situations. For those that don't know, Safe Haven does supervised visitation and safe exchanges. Typically that is sent by the court. The referrals are sent by the court, and usually for reasons of high conflict, domestic violence, substance use disorder. There may have been incarceration. We may be reintroducing this child to a parent. I've seen some kids that haven't seen their parents in 4 years or longer. So that is pretty intense when you witness that happen. So typically that's why their son is, there is conflict or there is obviously some issues that are happening in the family. The court is typically the person that sends families to us, but we also get self-referrals. So people may reach out and they're like, I'm in this situation and I need some assistance. We are funded by a grant that covers the majority of our clients. However, we are always, we have to have a match for that grant, and we're always looking for funding, being in the nonprofit world. The impacts, I think, that seem really important to touch on as far as the children is oftentimes when we're looking at domestic violence, we're looking at the survivor of domestic violence and the impact it has had on that person and all the decisions that they're having to make and how much trauma they're living in that situation. But sometimes we forget about the smallest people that are also experiencing the impacts of domestic violence. I lead with compassion. I try to make sure that I'm looking at all clients fairly and know that there's always more than one side to a story. Like, I'm not trying to blame anyone or put guilt on anybody as much as I am trying to find a way that I can communicate with them. And in that communication, that I am also giving them a perspective from their children's eyes. And that sometimes our behaviors, even though they're out of fear or anger, and anger for good reason sometimes, but who they impact the most, and the little eyes that are watching them and they think, oh, they're playing on their tablet. But ways that we see domestic violence stretch beyond the relationship into other relationships is there's a lot of manipulative behavior. There may be statements that are made about, you know, don't you have new shoes? I just sent, you know, I sent your parent, your other parent, $200. So it's putting the children in the middle of things of like, why don't I have new shoes? So there's little ways that can make the children feel like they're not being cared for. Oftentimes it seems like they're messengers. Sometimes it's like, well, tell your mom this or tell your dad that, which again is putting them in the middle of things that are completely out of their control. And I know that, you know, this past year has kind of introduced all of us to the land of uncertainty. We've all been living in this moment of like, what's next? And how do we move through this? And I like to say, welcome to domestic violence. This is where we live and work. It is definitely the land of uncertainty. You never know what's going to happen next. It does not get boring. For those that wonder if my job gets boring, it does not. Families are very complex, and they're the most complex thing that I can think of. You're always facing a new situation. And a lot of times there's not a book that can tell you all the things that you're going to come across and like, how do I handle this situation? Let me look at my handbook. It's not like that. There is a lot of gray in this line of work, and we're doing our best to make sure that we are following like, okay, what is the right thing to do? What is the fair thing to do? But most importantly, what is the safe thing to do? So that is Safe Haven, and a little bit about what we do. And again, I would also like to open up if you have questions about the impacts or what we do. If I didn't answer something, I do get really nervous speaking in crowds. It actually helps me. This Zoom, I like this. I've even not wore my real pants to court. I have wore my pajama pants. Some of y'all are probably doing that right now, aren't you? But anyway, so if anyone does have any questions about what we do or how to refer people, I would love to answer any questions you might have.
And I guess I can give a little bit more about what the prosecutor's office does and how we work with Autumn and with Christy. A couple things, and again, this is going to be really basic, so I apologize because some of you could be saying what I'm saying right now. But one thing that's important to remember is that when people come to my office or to Women's Resource Center or to Autumn, they're often at a very different point in that cycle of domestic violence. Usually, unless they're court ordered to get some kind of counseling or something, if they come to Christy, for example, they're at least contemplating that there's a problem in their relationship, or that they're maybe ready to leave or want to make some changes. Quite often the victims that we see are simply people who needed help one day or one night and made that call for help. And I think that was especially true this past year when people couldn't do things like, I'm going to leave and go to the bar, or I'm going to go to my mom's house, or I'm going to go hang out with my buddy to get away from you. But they were stuck at home during this pandemic. So we saw that even more. So the legal definition for domestic violence is an assault or an assault and battery. So some sort of forceful, violent, offensive touching that's done against someone who you're in a domestic relationship with. So that can be someone that you're dating, someone that you have or have kids with, a former resident of your household, or a spouse or former spouse. We certainly look at, when we're evaluating cases, we certainly look at that power and control wheel that Christy mentioned. We look at those forms of controlling behavior to try to understand the relationship more. But when it comes to actually prosecuting domestic violence, while we might read in a police report about a lot of things that are really horrible treatment of the partner, we have to have that physical aspect before we can become involved. One other thing that I wanted to point out that I think to some extent gets lost, and I feel like even when we talk to victims, this is something they don't understand. Domestic violence is so about power and control. It's not somebody that has an anger problem. We talk about, well, they're just angry. They just have an anger problem, or they're stressed out. These are individuals that can go hang out at the bar, that can go to work, that can be in really stressful situations day in and day out and not assault anyone until they're at home and they can assault the one person that they know will stand by them anyways. And so, I just think that's something to remember, something that somehow gets lost. This isn't an anger problem. And just to sort of piggyback too off of what Autumn said, and maybe Christy can speak more to this, but one of the things that I'm really proud of our area for is that the Women's Resource Center, the program that they use for domestic violence, it's a batterers intervention program, is actually goes sort of above and beyond the national standards. And there's a whole component on parenting. And I think that sometimes is one way to really get to people, is they know what they're doing to their partner, but they don't always understand what they're doing to their kids. And I think that's really important. And I think that's something that as a community we should be really proud of, is that we have a group here that specifically addresses that.
Yeah, so that would be our men's program, which is the batterers intervention for male offenders. We also have the AWARE program, which is batterers intervention for female offenders. Teresa Carey has been with the men's program for, I believe, going on 18 years or so now. So she's been around, and it uses a really good model that's empirically validated to actually reduce offenders using violence. So I really like seeing that, especially because I came here from Charleston, South Carolina, and we didn't have an empirically validated program in the area. And that was definitely reflected in the reoffending rates. So a big part of the men's program is, first of all, focusing on the offender's behavior, holding them accountable for that behavior, and getting them to realize why this behavior is harmful and cannot continue. And a big piece of that is recognizing that witnessing domestic violence in and of itself is harmful to children. Even if the offender didn't directly abuse the child, witnessing one of their parents being abused is traumatic. It is associated with a whole slew of problems in childhood development. When you're talking about the child may behaviorally act out and become a bully with their peers. They may be a victim of bullying. They may have trouble sleeping, eating, paying attention in school. And most important, they may grow up with the idea that this is how relationships are. This is how people behave in intimate relationships. And they're much more at risk of becoming either a victim or an offender in their own adult relationships, which is really, I think, the main goal that we all have and share is trying to interrupt that cycle. You know, that's something that I've told a lot of clients who've left an abusive relationship with children, and you start talking with them and you realize that client also witnessed domestic violence as a child. You know, her mom and dad had domestic violence, grandma and grandpa had domestic violence. It's through the whole family. One of the things I like to tell them is, hey, you know, you have the power to break that cycle in your family for all the generations that come after you. And that's really powerful.
I guess I'll just go back a little bit. One of the things that Sharon asked us to speak about was how we all work together. And, you know, I can tell you that my office wouldn't survive without Women's Resource Center and without Autumn's Safe Haven program. So we do have in my office, we have an MSW who is our victim advocate who's dedicated to intimate partner violence. But obviously, you know, she can't provide ongoing counseling to all the victims that we see. She can do crisis counseling. She can provide support in court. But one of the main things that she does is get victims set up with resources outside of our office, whether that's DHHS for, you know, financial support. You know, we send people to Women's Resource Center on a fairly regular basis for counseling, for help with personal protection orders. She also works with the victims, you know, if they do want to get, for instance, their kids in counseling, or if for whatever reason they want to counsel someplace other than Women's Resource Center, maybe because of where they live, she'll work with them and figure out based on their insurance where they will be able to go get that counseling. And then she routinely makes referrals to Safe Haven so that we can make sure, because we know that one of the most dangerous times for victims who are leaving a domestic violence relationship is that child custody and exchange, because that's sort of a, you know, an allowed, a legitimate reason that they have to be together. And that's the one time that the batterer has access to the victim. And so we refer many, many people to Autumn's program so that victims can be safe during that time and can live without that manipulation, without, you know, hearing some of those things about, you know, you're doing this to the kids or not treating them right or not giving them, you know, everything that I've, you know, the money that I've given you, those types of things. Something else that just started that I wanted to mention that our office has now is starting in 2019. We do get money from the state for direct victim services, which is something that hadn't happened before. We get a certain amount of money. I think it's $5,000 every year. Although if we go over, it's been pretty. We've only gone over once, I think, and it was not difficult to get more. But we do get money for direct services, so that we can help pay for things like co-pays on counseling. We have been able to pay to have somebody's locks changed. We had an incident where a domestic violence victim was pretty brutally assaulted. We were able to pay, she had to be at down in the Grand Rapids area for medical care, and we were able to pay for hotel stays for family members to be there with her so that they could take part in her rehabilitation and things like that. So that's kind of something new that we've been able to offer as well. But again, we routinely refer people to Women's Resource Center to get some of that additional support and obviously use Autumn's program on a regular basis.
Back off of that a little bit. Like I said, typically parents are sent to us by the court, and sometimes they are self-referrals. In that time, when we are helping them do the exchanges of their children or visitations with their children, we keep the parents completely separated. We do the communication between parents so they don't have to send each other nasty texts or meet in parking lots to exchange items, things like that. So we take that element of stress away, not just from the survivor, and it is stressful on the perpetrator as well. I mean, and they are still human. But it also takes away the stress that the children may be experiencing, you know, when they're in the car and their parents are arguing in the front, you know, from vehicle to vehicle, the children are not having to witness this or, you know, so it removes that element of stress away from the children as well. During our intake process, we kind of go, or not kind of, we thoroughly go over, you know, the experience that the family has had, all sides, and we are incorporating it to be more a set standard for us to do child intakes. Right now, the way that we have them is that they've been optional, but we've had too many parents that are not bringing children in when, and then the children do come in for visitations, they really don't know what's going on. So we're going to start making that part of the process. We're just kind of in the works of that to make that more, you know, part of our routine, so it doesn't seem like an extra thing, it just is part of it. We want to make sure that the children do know what is happening and what's going on and what their thoughts are on the situation, you know, how do they feel? But during that intake process, we also ask questions to see what are the family's needs. Working at Child and Family Services, we have several programs that could be helpful to these families in these particular moments. And there may be other community resources that we can connect them with. So typically we ask questions like, are you in counseling? Are the kids in counseling? Do you have a PPO? Do you need a PPO? Are you connected with the Women's Resource Center? Do you have legal assistance? There's you know, sometimes it comes out that children are suicidal because are, you know, making suicidal threats and things like that. And we can connect them with the FAST program, which is also something that Child and Family Services is partnered with Community Mental Health. And it's a youth crisis team where we go out and help diffuse situations to see if there is a need for hospitalization or can we safety plan and help this child through this tough moment. We have the wraparound program, the trauma assessment program. So there's all kinds of resources that we have at our agency, but also community-wide. You know, this is a community that does seem to really stand up for anything that's going on. I moved here from Tennessee, and I have loved that. You know, you always hear like Southern hospitality, but I have never felt a community so strong as I have this area. Everybody, you know, does seem to care and want to make sure that we're all looking out for one another and our environment. So I love this area for that reason. But anyway, just to kind of touch a little bit about how we do reach out to one another and how we all are connected.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that we're all working together. Obviously, Noelle and Autumn, not the first time we've crossed paths, because Women's Resource Center cannot solve domestic violence on our own. Noelle's office cannot fix domestic violence on their own. Neither can Autumn's. It's really nice to have those connections with multiple agencies that are all working on different angles, but towards the same end, which is to protect vulnerable victims and children in our community.
So, you don't have questions at this point, or go ahead, Sharon, sorry.
Oh, I was going to lead off with some questions. Actually, before I do that, and not by way of necessarily putting anybody on the spot, but so yesterday, Mary Kavanaugh again emailed me, and and pointed out that we may have been remiss in not inviting legal services of Northern Michigan to be part of the panel today, for which I apologize profusely. And Mary, if you are prepared to say something about your work with domestic violence, and Kristen, that's great. If not, great too, but I wanted to open up the opportunity for you.
Thank you. Not to date myself and Noelle, but I do recall when Noelle came to the community a long time ago. Just a couple things so that everybody knows. Legal Services of Northern Michigan, we provide free civil legal assistance to people who are at or below the poverty level. So we work in family law only with people who have experienced or are alleging domestic violence. So many of our cases are walking the same criminal. They have a criminal case going, then they have a civil case going where we are representing them in their custody matters or in their divorce matters. Sometimes, and oftentimes we're defending on personal protection orders. We don't necessarily draft the personal protection orders, but if they're being challenged, we come in and represent the clients on the challenge. I know my office staff work closely with Autumn over at Safe Haven, and I can't say enough about that, that organization. Many times, as Christy has mentioned, clients are afraid about what's going to happen to their children if they leave. And that's one of the main things clients tell us, is that they are not quite ready to leave, because that means the children may be alone with the abuser during parenting time. And that was a big barrier to many of our clients choosing to take that next step and to file. So, you know, again, the help of Safe Haven has been wonderful in helping our clients feel safe. I think the most important thing in this time of pandemic, and I can assure you our numbers went up in terms of seeking help. Sometimes, and many, well, it's not sometimes, we are oftentimes the first people beyond the domestic violence shelter where people express to us what's happening in the home and the abuse they're experiencing. So it's not necessarily going to be law enforcement that they express that to. We might be the first people. Many of you might be the first people, just in your role as a housing counselor, or if you're looking for food assistance, if you're working in the medical community. It's not always law enforcement. It's the first step. That's usually down the road. Many of our clients are making a calculated risk about whether or not they say something out loud. And so what is really important in our community is that the clients know they're going to be supported when they do take that step, and that they will have resources available to them when the family starts to separate or needs to separate. So that gives them the courage to do so. And so we are part of organizing that on one end. And all of you together, you may not know it, but you will always have a domestic violence victim in your office at least one time during the day when we have regular office hours. You will always have one. You will also always have a sexual assault victim in your office or on the phone at least one time during the day. Those are the numbers. So just be aware, the first contact you have if someone expresses something, they really need to know something is going to happen. If they perceive that they're not going to have the support, they will not take that next step. We have many cases where we ask the client, do you want to call the police? Do you want to do something? And they decline for that very reason. So, and it may be a true perception, it may be just their own. It may be what their abuser keeps telling them, just try it, nothing's going to happen. And so always be just very cognizant as a community, we have to let them know they're supported or they are not going to take that next step.
So,
Mary's, oh, sorry, but you know,
no, go ahead, Noelle.
People to Mary as well. And I work together with attorneys in her office on a fairly regular basis. Like I said, when someone comes to our office, they may not be at the same point they are when they go to Women's Resource Center or when they finally go talk to someone at Legal Services. And so we probably encourage more people to go see Mary than actually go there, but we do always, you know, let them know that they're there. And you know, just what Mary said about can't stress that enough, that it is so important to be open and supportive when you talk to people, because you don't know when. I mean, I tell that to my staff all the time, because, you know, it'll be the end of the day on a Friday and you're getting phone call after phone call, and I can tell in their voices that they're getting, you know, ready for the weekend, and they're not as cheery as they used to be when they're answering the phone. And it's like, you don't know what it took the person on the other end to, you know, get up the nerve to convince themselves to make this call. And so you really have to treat every call like, just be embracing and accepting. And that's so, so important. So.
Carol, you have your hand up.
Yeah, actually I have two questions. The first one would be, if short of 911, where you're going to call the police, who is the first call if you're a victim of domestic violence, or maybe someone who knows, works with, or cares about somebody? Who is there an 800 number? Is there a local number? Who do they first approach?
So if you, for example, are working with someone who discloses domestic violence to you and you're trying to sort it out, you can definitely call our hotline. Our hotline goes 24/7. There's always a human being who's trained in domestic violence to answer the phone. And our approach and philosophy when we take those crisis calls is, first of all, we want to make sure that person is safe in that moment. You know, are you safe to talk to me right now? And then you get some details on their situation and ask them, what would you like to see happen? You know, can we assist you with calling law enforcement to make a report? Do you want to talk to someone over at the prosecutor's office? Would you like a PPO? Do you want to enter shelter? And we can just kind of go down all those paths. And our philosophy is one of empowerment, because it's not helpful for us to tell someone who's being controlled by their partner and having their every move monitored and controlled to say, hey, you need to leave right now tonight. Because we're not the ones that have to live with the consequences of that decision. So we will definitely provide information, options, and if that person identifies, yes, I want to make a police report, or yes, I want to come into shelter tonight, we're going to help them make that happen.
So if I go to the Women's Resource Center website, or what, there's a number, a posted number there or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you Google just Women's Resource Center, for whatever reason, Google really liked us and we come up first. You don't even have to put in Traverse City. So actually, we do want to verify that you are in fact in Northern Michigan. We get a lot of calls from California and Georgia. And I even got one email from a lady in Brazil one time. So I think my farthest away.
Okay, thank you. I did have
Number in
another.
the chat. I just pulled it up and I'm going to enter the number in the chat so you guys have it as well.
I did have one other question, if I can ask, Sharon.
No, you're cut off, of course.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So there's an awful lot of agencies. Looks like you guys are working together, and you know, from law enforcement to Noel's office and all the, and I'm not even sure how the organizational structure works, but what would you guys say is missing? I don't know, funding is probably the first thing that comes to everybody's mind, but so
of course.
Yeah, right. So if you're looking at this structurally, what's missing?
Can I speak? I think the thing that comes to me the most is that gap and what the children have experienced, and how do we keep them safe, not just physically, but emotionally too. And sometimes the last time they saw a parent, that parent had, you know, a cord wrapped around their other parent's neck. And then we're putting them in a room to play Jenga. So oftentimes, for my perspective, is I feel like my hands are a little tied sometimes. I have to remind myself of my role. It's to keep them safe, it's to keep them safe. But sometimes the missing piece to me is I wish that we had more therapeutic counseling that was ordered in harder cases, because sometimes children are, they're expected to carry on a relationship with a parent that they're still so angry and hurt by, and to go play Jenga, and we try to keep the conversations in the present and light to where we're not triggering some emotional harm. So we have to really monitor what the conversations are. From our perspective, Safe Haven, we do allow the children to initiate conversations, but that parent really has to skirt a line of answering things appropriately, not pointing fingers at anyone else, taking accountability for their portion of things, not, saying, well, I wouldn't have done this if, this hadn't happened. We want people to be able to take accountability for one, that tells the children, it validates, their experience and their feelings of like, oh, I thought that was wrong. So, that piece of us trying to keep the conversations light, sometimes that's not what that child needs at that moment. They need to like dig in, and they want to say, why did you do this? And I have had some really uncomfortable situations where kids are like, why did you hit mommy? Did you say you were sorry? And that is always like, oh my gosh, you feel so happy for children when they feel brave enough to, confident enough to have those conversations. But there is a missing element from my perspective of oftentimes we're putting kids in a place to forgive when they haven't been given the tools or the opportunity to forgive, the conversation, the facing what actually happened.
I guess I would, wholeheartedly agree. Even when we have a domestic violence case that goes through the court system, we can ask for restitution to help pay for counseling for the victim. That doesn't always counseling for the children because they aren't the named victims. And, on top of that, you're asking one of the parents who's now trying to work and single parent for the first time ever, that, hey, now you've also got to get your 2 or 3 kids to counseling on a weekly basis, and figure out a way to pay for that and work full time and all this other stuff. So just sort of that extra support in the community, so that there is some kind of counseling. I would love to see something eventually in the schools, but that's, I don't know, we haven't been able to get there yet. But Christy talked about how this is a generational thing. We have kids that grow up that don't know any different. They go to a friend's house and they see mom and dad getting along and not calling each other names, and they don't understand that that's how most people live. And that's the only way that we're really going to break that cycle. We have had, we've got the Traverse Bay CAC, so that when we have kids who witness violence, we can have them go there, be interviewed about what they saw in a safe place, and then they can go to the CAC for counseling to try to work through some of that and process that. But that's not all the kids, and that piece is so important, and I think that is still a piece that's kind of missing in our community.
May I interject too? I just wanted to say that thank you, Mary, so much for filling in the gap that we did see of not having legal help for some of our parents who were in such a bind of having to lose maybe the main breadwinner of their home, and then face some of the issues that Noelle is talking about of like, I've got to figure out how I'm going to get them here and there on my own, and pay for all of this. And then Mary, you guys have really, really helped fill a gap in offering some legal services for parents that are already in such a stressful time. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
I just want to add, just so the community understands maybe the intensity of the escalation of domestic violence in just the last 4 or 5 years. Not only do we have added, staff, so now we have 3 full-time staff in our Grand Traverse office. Plus, we have 2 extra attorneys we keep on contract through Child and Family Services. And we've just added another specialized abuse attorney for senior abuse. I mean, this is escalating. We're trying to respond to what is happening and the request for help. People are trying to leave. And I'm not sure if the community at large always understands, because the rest of us are always working so diligently on our cases or trying to find the resources for our clients, that we forget sometimes to speak up and let the community know at large. This has really been escalating in the last 5 years to the point where we're adding enough, as much as we can, the staff that we can when we have the money. So I do appreciate, Safe Haven and the shelter and Noelle and her group for all the work they're doing. But I think the community at large, if we could really focus on, oftentimes I'm always saying, man, I wish law enforcement, meaning sheriffs and deputies, Michigan State Police, if they would continue with their training consistently, because we have turnover. And as everybody was talking, I'm thinking maybe as a community, we can't just expect certain groups to have the training. I think it just needs to be a community training, and that's dedicated to understanding domestic violence in our community, because it's a community problem. It's not a woman's problem. It's not law enforcement's problem totally. And if we could somehow think about it in our own agencies or our businesses, and get the community to agree that this is something we should be doing every year or biannually to train up our staff and to train everybody in the community, so we know what we're looking at and we can respond, and so the victims will feel supported whatever pod they land into. So that would be my thought on what's missing in the community, going back to Daryl's question, and the importance that we have when we're all working together. We do have really good outcomes. And again, Child and Family Services over the years has always stepped up and been such a great support for us and guiding us and pushing us a little bit about, don't you need a couple more? We have some money over here. So if there's another gap in the services, it's really hard, and maybe Noelle understands this as well. It's hard to find attorneys to work up north. And right now, because of the federal government giving us a lot of money, anybody who knows an attorney who's trainable and can tolerate me, have them apply, because we do have positions. It's just hard to fill and to convince people to move north as attorneys to do this kind of work. We have enough money, but we don't have enough bodies right now. And that's statewide. And I'm sure Noelle and the prosecutor's office are experiencing the same thing. So we do have a desperate need, but we have a capacity problem at this point.
And I think to echo everyone else, resources and capacity are kind of the biggest headaches and barriers from folks doing this type of work. Definitely, there's also a shortage of licensed counselors in the area, whether that's LMSWs or LPCs. We've definitely referred clients for therapy, because therapy is not a service that we can offer in-house. And they're frequently on wait lists, just because right now, as you might have guessed, there's a lot of anxious and stressed people who are seeking therapy services. So that's been an extra layer. But I think we also can't ignore how this issue of domestic violence in the community interacts with the affordable housing crisis, which has also been going on for quite some time, because affordable or low-income housing is the biggest barrier for a lot of these women to leave and stay gone. We unfortunately have many reports of victims who do leave for a period of time, and then they end up returning because they're not able to find a sustainable, affordable place to live. And I think until we solve the affordable housing crisis, or at least get some more actual units that are available, we're going to continue to see that pattern, unfortunately.
And Margie has thrown a great comment into the chat box. Margie, would you like to elaborate?
Sure. And I will
start my video. Yeah, so we work with a very, very small population of the people experiencing domestic violence, but it is, we work with teen parents and certainly collaborate with the Women's Resource Center and Safe Haven and Mary Kavanaugh we go to. But we have a social worker on staff who is able to provide counseling and therapy for free to our clients. And many of our young parents have experienced domestic violence. It's a very common experience. In fact, I think, Christy, you could address this, but my understanding is that teen parents, adolescent women who are pregnant, have the highest rate of domestic violence of any subpopulation. And it certainly proves true with our population. So we work with our young women in particular all the time, but also we work with young fathers. And so if they're witnesses to domestic violence or if they themselves may be victims, which does certainly happen with our population, we can work with them as well. Thank you.
So when all of us are out and about in the community or doing our work, ladies, what should we be looking for? How do you identify, what are the clues that somebody that you're working with may be experiencing domestic violence?
There can be a lot of different clues. Some of them might be very obvious, you know, bruises, injuries, things like that. Sometimes it could be more subtle. Let's say you're trying to meet with a client and you notice that their phone keeps going off repeatedly and that they're very anxious about checking their phone. It's very common for abusers when their partner's not directly in their presence to basically use these smartphones that we all have to control their partner. You know, what are you doing? Who are you talking to? When are you coming home? Who else is there? Unfortunately, you know, when I first started in the field in 2006, we didn't have nearly the technology that we have now, as far as, you know, like GPS maps. And what we're seeing now is abusers will use that, like location services on a smartphone, to know where their victim is at all times. If you're noticing that someone is scared to go home, they're reluctant, that they seem unable to make or commit to a decision without having to get their partner's approval. If they mention that, oh, I can't do that because, you know, my husband won't allow that. You know, statements like that, that can kind of open a door and be like, can you tell me more about that? You know, why would you be worried about that? Or what's your concern? What do you think might happen? I think a lot of times most victims are not going to disclose until they are personally ready. And it can be really difficult even for someone who's in the relationship to recognize themselves as a victim of abuse. That's a difficult thing for people to identify as. It's not something that anyone wants to identify as. And I think there's can be a lot of resistance to it. But mostly I would say trust your instincts. If you're feeling like something's wrong, you're feeling like maybe this person is unsafe, try to open the door for communication.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is kind of, you have to do it in a very open way, but err on the side of saying something, of caution. You know, sometimes it's something subtle, like we get someone calls very upset because you sent this letter to me, not to my husband. Not because she's upset that she got the letter, but because the husband will be upset that it came to her and not him. Putting Mrs. on a victim impact statement instead of, you're saying Miss instead of Mrs. And her worrying about what the defendant or what her husband, I'm sorry, will say if he sees that. So just little tiny things like that, that you kind of pick up on that just make you feel uneasy. And what Christy said is so important. Just ask the open-ended question. Why does that concern you? Or can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because one, maybe they haven't even put together that they are in a controlling relationship. Maybe this has just happened gradually and they're not even at that state of awareness yet. Or two, maybe they are, but they don't know how to get out. And just, even if they're not ready, just knowing that there's someone out there who's listening, who's willing to be supportive, just sort of plants a seed or gives them a little bit more empowerment, so that when they are ready, they can address the situation.
Something else that's that comes to mind for me is a lot of times survivors are not going to be in the workforce because the power and control dynamic, they may be kept at home to take care of the children. But if you work with somebody who has some unexplained absences, or marks sometimes that are always wear long sleeves, and you know, like if they did pull their sleeve up, they have a mark or something on their wrist where they've been grabbed. Thumb bruises are kind of distinct. When somebody has been grabbed, often you can kind of like recognize a thumb bruise. Other things is that person being driven to work? Do they have their own car? And that's something that I have noticed is oftentimes the perpetrator of violence is controlling who they, you know, how they get places. So they drive them everywhere they go. And then I also wanted to note, I think the number that I put in, I looked up and I put in the first one that came to mind, but that's Pennsylvania. Christy, is there a text line also? It looks like I pulled something up here and it looks like there might be a text line, 941-1734. Is that a okay? I'm not sure what that.
No, that's our fax number.
Okay, a fax. Okay.
We actually
cool.
don't have the tech support, either the hardware or the software to support a texting line right now.
Okay.
It's something that we've been looking at, and Heather, our grant admin, is also here and is always diligently trying to find us money for everything. But I don't think we're there yet on that one.
Okay. And then for those of you who like podcasts, this isn't a horrific podcast, so don't get mad at me when you start crying if you do decide to listen to this, but there's a podcast called Cold that kind of follows a family, and you see how domestic violence can escalate to this seemingly, you know, very together church going family to tragedy. So it kind of outlines like how you can see it from an outside view and not recognize it, but then how horrific that can escalate to. And it's called Cold.
One thing that I think we'd kind of be remiss not to say today is that, and I'm sure Autumn and Mary and Christy can speak to this as well, but given the pandemic, we've seen domestic violence, you know, there's always an escalation. I mean, no one gets punched on the first date and comes back for a second date. That's what I tell people. But so it starts out with maybe some controlling behaviors, maybe some name calling, something that can maybe feel protective and almost like chivalrous. And then it turns into that truly controlling behavior. And then it's name calling and belittling. And then it moves into assaultive behavior that escalates from, you know, from a grab or a slap to punching, or, you know, what we see so many times is the strangulation. And at least in our office, we've seen sort of over the pandemic, and I think it's just people who already have these issues and now they're under extra stress and there's no place else to go. We've seen a more rapid escalation in the level of violence that's used to control someone. And that's been very frightening to see.
Yeah, and we definitely saw a sort of a lull in calls to our crisis line, especially when the state was under, you know, hard lockdown. Everyone was home, only essential workers, that whole phase. And in my office, we were very uneasy about it because we knew that it's not like domestic violence took a pause because of COVID, but it was really difficult for people to call us if they're home 24/7 with their abusive partner and there's no opportunity to safely call. So we have seen our numbers climb back up. what I was kind of predicting was as the state opened back up and more people were getting out of the house, that we were going to see kind of a wave. And I think that wave is here, just kind of based on what's been going on in my office the past few weeks. 'Cause I think every time I try to go see my coworker, Carl, that he is working on a PPO, it seems like. So, you know, one of the other issues that we've had with that is reducing capacity in our shelter to safely social distance. Our shelter is a 22-bed facility. There's only 5 bedrooms. So now our capacity is much lower. We don't have a hard number on it because it depends on the family size, but we can no longer house more than 2 unrelated women in the same room, just because there's no way to keep 6 feet between them. So that's definitely been a challenge. We've worked with some local hotels who've given us some nice discounts to help us manage to hotel people in the event of us being over capacity, or if we have a family that needs to quarantine because of an exposure. So that's definitely been a challenge. I think I've read more health department and CDC memos than I ever cared to in my entire life. And, you know, we're not out of the woods yet.
If I could ask Noel and or Christy, could you explain maybe to the community why strangulation and choking is really, really important to be aware of, and where it lands on lethality and what it means to the environment the victim's in that moment?
And Christy, you can piggyback off me, but strangulation is honestly one of the most frightening things we see. When you think about it, or the most frightening acts, when you think about it, the perpetrator literally has the victim's life in his or her hands at that point. And, you know, you do that to someone one time, have them at the point where they're about to lose consciousness, where they don't know if they're going to make it out of the situation. And the control that you would then have over that person is immense, because they know when you say, I could hurt you, I could kill you, that you absolutely mean it and that you have that ability to do that. One of the most frustrating things that we deal with is we know this. We know that that's where it escalates to, and that's sort of a very, very scary point. It's a 10-year felony, the same as assault with intent to do great bodily harm, which is like someone being severely beaten. And it's extremely hard to prove. There are studies that show, and maybe some of you in the military, I know our officers have to go through something like this at points, but by cutting off the blood supply and the arteries on either side of your neck, you can lead someone to unconsciousness without leaving a single mark. And so how do you prove that? You know, it makes it extremely difficult. And there are now studies that show that women who have had this happen to them multiple times, you know, you'll have someone come in and they'll say, you know, he strangled me to the point that I've lost consciousness 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And now we're seeing that there's effects on their brains, almost like having a TBI, because this has happened over and over again. And so, you know, from my perspective, it's certainly a sign of how dangerous things are. It's absolutely frightening how common it is. And it's frustrating because it is extremely difficult for us to prove. And, you know, you talk to people sort of in the general community, and well, if she was strangled, of course there'd be marks. There's no marks. There's nothing there. And if people really understood, this is such a frightening tool for batterers to be able to use. It's a huge issue.
Yeah, and especially because we know that one of the biggest, what we call lethality indicators, which is a red flag that this situation is dangerous enough that it might lead to a homicide. Strangulation is the #1 on that list. If an abuser has used strangulation against their partner, that is definitely a dangerous situation. You know, there's some other indicators on that list would be any past use of a weapon, if there has been a history of sexual assault from one partner to another, if the abuser has recently lost their job or had interaction with law enforcement, been incarcerated, and if there is a recent separation between the parties. Because unfortunately, the most dangerous time for most victims is when they leave or when they are attempting to leave, because that abuser is losing control of their partner, and they are going to escalate as much as they can to try to regain that control. We know that most domestic homicides happen when the victim has left or is attempting to leave. We know that 75% of emergency room visits by victims happen when they're leaving or attempting to leave. So I think that's another very valid fear that a lot of victims have that prevent them from leaving.
So we're back. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just one quick question. Do guns play a significant role in DV in this community, panel folk or anyone who might know? And if so, do we have local laws on the books about perpetrators who have used guns in the past in domestic violence situations where their permits are, or their ability to own a gun or have a gun is taken from them? I don't know.
So if there's kind of a gap, I guess, in the law at this point. If someone is convicted of domestic violence, under federal law, they can no longer have a firearm. Under Michigan law, they can have a firearm back after they're off of probation or off of any type of supervision. So, in reality, ATF, no federal agent is going to come take a gun away from some single guy in northern Michigan. We've tried, and it doesn't happen. We honestly have not seen, in the years that I've been here, I think I've only seen one situation involving a domestic violence situation involving, where a gun was used. There have been a handful of times, but most of the time it's just hands-on. And it's that, again, to me, the strangulation piece is the really scary one, more so than weapons. And I'm sure, again, people come to me when they have to come to me. So Christy and maybe Mary and Autumn's situations might be different, but that hasn't been a huge part. The guns haven't played a huge part in what we're seeing.
Safe Haven's view, you do ask that question in the intake of if a weapon is used to intimidate or threaten a party. And oftentimes it is used as a threat. They put it on the table when they're drinking and they're upset, and it's used for intimidation. They have held them to their head. So they haven't necessarily used it in a way that, shooting, sometimes they've shot out the window or they've shot a pet. I've had so many different instances that come to mind when you ask that question, Gina, and such a sensitive question right now and significant. But definitely, I see a lot of survivors stating that they have been threatened with a weapon. So whether that's just a use of intimidation is mostly what it has been used for, is, to set it and it be present, to have a lot of guns, to make those threats of that they can harm you with that gun if you leave or if you think about leaving. I do see that, and there is a gap, because even if they're not supposed to have that gun, if it has been asked that person not have a gun, I don't think that there's anyone that is enforcing that those guns are taken. So they're not going and saying, okay, we know that you're registered with 3 guns and we need to take them now. I don't think that we have the place to put them. So there's another, a gap in resources. Where would we put all these guns that we took from people? Some people have, 30, 40 guns or more. But I know that that's a gap, the boyfriend loop of, people having access to those guns when they have committed these acts of violence, and knowing that they might escalate to homicide. How do we protect those people with those gaps in our laws?
I'm just going to add to what Autumn has said. Many of our clients, they know exactly how many guns are in the house because they've been told. It's used, it's brandished. That's why it was, the recent incident with the county commissioner, I was surprised that there was no comment that he was talking to a woman who was standing up to him. And he was praising a group that encourages misogynistic views. I mean, this is how they control the clients and the victims. And our clients tell us all kinds of stories about, they put the gun, not because they're drunk or anything, they put it next to the bed on the bedstand to keep them in line. Or they tell them there's a name on a bullet for you and the kids. Those things it's very common. It doesn't always get to the prosecutor's office because our clients are so afraid. When you ask, do you want to make a report? No, they don't, because that gun is closer to them than Noel's office or than the deputy. So that there is a gap, but it is used. I don't want anybody to think for a minute that guns aren't an issue. They just don't get to the prosecutor's office, but they're in, as Autumn describes, and as we know with our clients. The victims know exactly where the guns are because they've been told where they are and sometimes how many bullets are in the chamber, just to keep them in line. So it is an issue. It's not one talked about a lot in that context because we've normalized it so much that the gun community has changed over the last generation. And so all of this I think we're catching up with, but it certainly happens, and it's certainly said to our staff, and we always offer them, do you want to make a report? And they know better than we do the level of danger they're facing. And if they choose not to, we say, okay, let's make sure you have a really good safety plan. Because that's, there is a gap in this.
And I think that just showed, really illustrated what I mentioned at the beginning, where, people who come to us are coming to us at different places. There's a lot that I will never know because a victim's not willing to share that with me. For instance, we know that in a domestic violence relationship, probably most cases, there's coercive sexual assault happening as well, or forceful sexual assault. But that's something a victim isn't going to share with me because they know, just like they know with guns, that sort of increases the severity, increases my concern about their person, and then puts them at danger in their minds because they're sharing that information about what the person did. We have to give that credit and remember that for a DV victim, they know how to keep themselves safe and their children safe better than the rest of us because they know that person better than we do. And so, it's sort of that know your enemy, or know, sometimes being close to your enemy and being able to see what they're doing is the way to keep yourself safest. And so, points out a couple different things, just what victims are willing to share at different stages, and also that we have to trust them to keep themselves safe and not try to push them, not try to say, no, you need to leave, no, you need to do this, but to trust that they know their situation and offer them resources, but not tell them what to do. We need to empower them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think best approach is to realize that survivor is the expert on their situation, because there's going to be a lot of individual factors to that situation. Giving resources, giving options, asking them, what would you like to see happen? What do you think is going to keep you safe? Asking the survivor is actually one of the best indicators of, is the situation going to escalate? Just their individual sense of it. It's better than any, empirically validated checklist or tool that's been developed. They found that the most reliable thing to do is ask that person, what do you think is going to happen? So I do think that's really important, and also to not, again, jump to the, you have to leave right now tonight. That survivor may not be ready to do so. There may be some important safety factors why they're not ready to do so. They may be trying to keep an eye on their assailant so that they can prepare for what's happening. They may be worried that the assailant will have unsupervised time with their children, and that can be a barrier. So I think being supportive, being believable, and offering options is always the best approach.
Well, thank you, ladies. I think this has been a very informative / heartbreaking discussion. If anybody has any other questions, do forward them along and we'll make sure they get answered. We have a few minutes left, so maybe we could ask for some quick updates from the group if anybody has anything they want to share. And I will also point out that today is newsletter day. So if you have something you'd like to have go in the newsletter, please get it to me ASAP today. Kathleen, you always have something.
I was about to use the raise my hand feature. First, I learned a lot from this presentation. Thank you all for sharing. It was very informational. And I appreciate you guys being here and sharing. I'm Kathleen from Habitat Grand Traverse Region. I have updates about our Restore in Grand Traverse, in Traverse City. We are open. We're a retail shop. You can donate items and shop there. We're open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4. We are closed for shopping on Thursdays because we are doing pickups one day a week to get larger donations. We're renting a truck. There was a time where we stopped doing pickups because we weren't comfortable doing that, but we are currently doing pickups. I don't know how long it will last. People can still donate on Thursdays. We just don't have the staff to keep the store open for shopping and donating. So Restore is open. For our programs, we have openings for our home repair program in Grand Traverse, Kalkaska, and Leelanau counties. Our home repair program can help people make affordable repairs. You have to be eligible based on your income and some other circumstances with home ownership, things like that. It's not free. A lot of times people think it is free. We do have a payback for that, depending on someone's income, where they'll just pay for part of the cost of the repair through affordable monthly payments. But we have openings for that program throughout 3 counties that we serve. And we're also selecting homeowners. I know these are outside of Grand Traverse County, but I still like to share because I know a lot of your offices serve several counties. We have 5 homes in Maple City and Leelanau County that we are selecting homeowners for to purchase. Affordable home purchase. We're helping people buy these homes. So I am accepting applications for that. And we have 1 home in Kalkaska that we have not selected anyone for yet. So we're still accepting applications for that location as well. We don't have an administrative office, but our contact info is on our website or on our Facebook. So if you need to get in touch or send clients to us, you can have them reach out to me specifically. I work with people interested in applying to our programs. Thanks for letting me share.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Lisa Anderson.
Yeah, real quick. So we are continuing what we call our Stronger Together family support sessions. This is an initiative of Families Against Narcotics. It's a really good place to refer family members who have a loved one who is suffering or possibly has even lost their battle with substance use disorder. It meets every other Tuesday. So the next one is 4/6, April 6th at 7 o'clock. It's virtual right now. And then the good news is, you know, sometimes 2 weeks can be a long time when folks need that constant support. We are starting another group in Kalkaska that meets in the evening, same time, also virtually, but on the opposite Tuesday. So if somebody needed that support weekly, they could get it now. And is a regional initiative in the Grand Traverse area and covers Grand Traverse, Leelanau, and Kalkaska. Sometimes people think it's just Grand Traverse County, but it is not. Also, with Families Against Narcotics, on the 10th of April, I will be doing a naloxone training at Living Hope Church, which is the one that's across from Walmart there on South Airport. And Living Hope Church has agreed to be a Hope Not Handcuffs hub through Families Against Narcotics. So I'm training volunteers there, and anybody who wants naloxone training can come to that training. And last but not least, Drug Take Back Day, which is a national initiative, is on 4/24th. And our local law enforcement agencies actually have receptacles in several of their locations, but because of the opioid epidemic, they have broadened that to places like pharmacies, and Munson has a receptacle. And if you need a list of locations, you can actually just Google Drug Take Back Day, and it will take you to a map where you can click close to where you're at and find the nearest location. So that's it.
Lauren.
The Grand Traverse County Drug Free Coalition is continuing our Color for Hope fundraiser. So these are 18 by 24-inch colorable posters that were designed by a local artist who lost her daughter to an overdose. So the proceeds from this are going towards education, prevention, and treatment in our community. So far, we have purchased nalox boxes, which are similar to the AEDs that are up on the walls in schools and things like that for the libraries. So we are continuing that. I'll put my email in the chat. You can contact me for more information, and it's also Sharon's been adding it to the bi-monthly newsletter. So more information in there as well.
Anybody else? Val.
There we go. The Northwest Food Coalition, I just want to give you an update on what's happening there. Most all of the pantries are open and in serving in some capacity. Generally, it is taking orders and then doing a drive up. But we have opening most of our pantries. The meal sites are serving meals, and most of the baby pantries are open in some capacity. Clients can go to our website, which is northwestmifoodcoalition.org, and they can find on there where it says find food, and they just click in and to the county that they're looking for food in, and it will tell all the pantries that are open and the times they're open and what method they're using, like I said, which is drive up. But surprisingly, our numbers seem to be down, and we know that that is because of the extra food stamps that are offered through September. Hopefully I'll call it the stimulus money will be coming soon for some. And hopefully that can mean that rents are being paid with it, because food is certainly accessible. And that's one area that there's plenty of help available for it. So thank you.
Speaking of rents, Sarah, do you want to say anything about the Sarah program?
And good morning. Sarah is our COVID emergency rental assistance program. It did start last Monday. We are running really, really quickly. We have close to 100 applicants already, and we've processed 24, I think, within the last, 7 days, 8 days since it started. So it's moving really quickly and efficiently, I think.
Sarah, where are you? What program are you with?
Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency, homeless prevention.
So basically have people call the 844 number.
Nope. Actually, if they go to the MISHDA website, the application and all the information is on the MISHDA website. And they're going to have an active portal that everything is going to be done online through that MISHDA portal. It is not up and running until the end of this month or April 1st. So for now, they're just having everybody fill everything out and then send it to our prevention email, which is on the MISHDA website.
Okay. And I'll put a link to that website in the notes. Anybody else? Bueller? I'll just put a plug out there. I did send some requests for dues out right around the end of the year, and thanks to those agencies who have made a contribution. If you have not made a contribution, I will be kindly encouraging your director once again to do that. So, all righty. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Noelle, Christy, Autumn, and Mary for your input, and we will see you all next month. Have a good spring break.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, great presentation.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you, Sharon.